Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! I work as a nurse at the local jail. This plays a role later. On to our cast introduction. There is me, the crazy Karen, sweet little old lady, law enforcement officer, my favorite two-legged kitty cats, charge nurse, the shift boss. I took it upon myself to hit a nearby supermarket during my lunch break to pick up some stuff to go. It was a chef salad I made. I love salads, y'all. Yeah, I'm southern, feel free to pick fun if you want. The place isn't big, but it's always clean and the staff are always nice. I head down the aisle split of crackers / cookies and bottled drinks. I get down about halfway when I notice the little old lady struggling to reach something over her head. I guess she's maybe 5 feet tall. I stop and ask her if I can help. I'm 5'10", so there isn't much out of my reach. She points out her item. I grab it for her and she thanks me for the help. I tell her my mom is about her size, so I'm used to it, and I'm just glad she wasn't stuck waiting too long for help. Right then I hear it. Dun dun dun. Crazy Karen. Now that you're done bull crabbing with that old hag, you need to put these water cases in my cart. Me turning to look at her. I'm sorry, ma'am, I don't work here. I was just stopping to help this lady. I don't want to hear your excuses. Do your job. Me motioning to my scrubs. Seriously, I don't work here. I then started to walk away. The crazy Karen grabs my arm to stop me digging her nails into my arm. Do your job now. I snatch my arm away. Lady, if you ever touch me again, I will end you. Again, I don't work here. Go find an associate to do that. I take a few steps and I see a can fly by my head. Cue demonic position Karen mode. I turn around to see this psycho wielding another can of veggies that she chucks at me as hard as she can. Missing again, thank God. All the while screaming about how lazy and incompetent I am and that she will have my job. Mind you, I am backing further away when a cashier who can see down the aisle from the register runs our direction and another apparently called the police. The crazy Karen continues to yell and throw items not only at me, but at the staff that start to accumulate. Nothing she is saying is making any sense. Finally, the law enforcement officer makes it to the scene, attempts to calm the woman, and of course, ends up putting her in cuffs, during which she screams assault and tries to bite the guy. The staff and a sweet little old lady all gave statements about the incident. The old lady was a little shaken but unharmed as she ended up behind the crazy Karen after she grabbed me. Once he has her under control, I check out and head back to work. I stop in medical to tell the charge nurse about the crazy Karen and that she'll need to book her in for me. I clean the nail marks in my arm and we head back to the booking. It took some time for them to show up, apparently after she was in a cruiser when began yelling about her kid being in a car, an 8-year-old, the child's father is cold. We're all standing and booking when the exterior door slides open and here comes the law enforcement officer with the crazy Karen in tow. Still acting a fool. The booking process, medically speaking, is pretty quick. Vitals and a few questions. Do you have any health problems? Are you on any medications? Are you feeling homicidal or suicidal? Karen's eyes locked on me. What is that witch doing here? The officer tells her she works here. Take these cuffs off me. I'm gonna kill that witch. The charge nurse tells me to go into the office and then attempts to perform the booking assessment. The crazy Karen pretty much ignoring the questions and cussing at the nurse, yelling about killing me when she gets her hands free. To this, the charge nurse says to the officers, yeah, she appears to be homicidal by her own admission. She needs to go to self-harm observation. The crazy Karen was charged for assault, child endangerment, assault on a police officer, and possession of crack cocaine. She was placed in a psych cell with nothing but a turtle suit on. Upside of this situation, the father of the child called me earlier this week to thank me because he's been trying to get custody of the child, and with this arrest has a good shot to take her on and give her some normalcy. I am glad something good came of all this. The downside though, I work the wings during medication pass that this woman will be in now, until who knows when. To think all of this started over a trip for ranch dressing and Triscuits. So this happened earlier today. I was too perfect to not share with you guys. I work in construction as a foreman for a new house built. The location is kinda strange. The house is 250 feet up a hill via footpath only. All of our materials have to come up this footpath by hand, and it's a pain to manually carry quite literally an entire house up this hill. One of our saving graces is having the 2 parking spots on a street at the bottom of this hill marked with official no parking signs. Unfortunately, there is an elementary school about half a block away, and the parents of children seem to regularly, at least twice a day, think it's okay to park in our spots. Now I consider myself a reasonable person, so if someone is parked in a spot and we don't have a delivery or a need to park a truck, I will let it go. If we need the spots and there is someone parked there, however, I will ask them to move nicely, and most of the time they do so immediately. Until today. I get a phone call from the lumber delivery truck that is en route to our location. He says he will be there in about 2 or 3 minutes. I let him know I will meet him on a street and make sure he has space to park. He's carrying all the material to frame the roof of our house, which is a lot of really big lumber and will take easily an hour to bring up the hill. So naturally, I didn't want him parked in the middle of the street with his hazard on for an hour, especially when we have a perfectly good parking spot for him. As I begin my trip down the hill, I notice there is a school parent sitting in her car idling, assuming she is just waiting to pick up her kid. I walk up to her car and politely let her know that she's parked in a no parking zone. We really need her to clear it to park a delivery truck. She scoffs at me and rudely states back, "I'll be just a few minutes and your truck isn't here yet. Take a chill pill, dude." Before I can respond, the giant lumber truck comes around the corner and I wave to him, and then gesture towards him to the woman in the car who has now put her window back up to ignore me. I put on my best customer service smile and wave at her through the window. She puts it down halfway and angrily shouts, "What?" By now the truck has pulled up alongside her car, and I politely ask her again with a stronger tone of voice to move her vehicle, reminding her that she's illegally parked in a tow-away zone. Then she gives me this wonderful idea. She says, "Can't you guys just unload around me? It's not that hard." I give her another smile and walk away, a brilliant plan forming in my head. I instruct the delivery driver to park as closely to her as possible and plug her in with a porta potty that is at one end of our reserved spots and a parked car that is parked just adjacent to our spots on the other end. He smiles because, well, he immediately gets what I'm trying to do and proceeds to expertly plug this lady and her car into a little 2 parking spot jail. We unstrap the lumber and my guys begin humping material up the hill. Meanwhile, I call the police parking enforcement to let them know the situation. At this point in time, I wasn't trying to get her in trouble. I just wanted the record of why we were blocking part of the street so we don't get in trouble with the city. The very friendly traffic officer lets me know that she can be there in about 30 minutes and deal with this whole situation for me. Wonderful. As we continue to unload lumber, the child of the parent shows up, and wouldn't you know it, Mom is just now realizing that the lumber truck is parked so close she can't get out of her driver door to meet her kid. She awkwardly clambers across the side of her car and stumbles out the passenger door, shooting glaring looks at me and the truck driver in the process. She loads her kid into the back and then begins to realize that she has no way of leaving. She comes storming up to me and the driver and she states, "I'm in a big hurry. You need to move your truck right now so I can go." Before I can respond, the driver gets a grin on his face and says, "Ma'am, in order to unload the lumber on a truck, we had to unstrap it. And per our company policy, I am not allowed to move the truck with any unsecured load on it. Sorry." This sends her into near aneurysm level of blood pressure. Meanwhile, I can barely contain my laughter. "Screw your policy. I have somewhere to be." She barks back at him. At this point, with impeccably convenient timing, the parking enforcement officer shows up and parks behind the truck. She doesn't see the officer arrive, and while the officer is still getting out of her vehicle, I just casually say, "Can't you just pull out around it?" It's not that hard. I said that with the biggest grin I've ever had. I watch as she realizes that I just used her line on her. "Screw you," she yells and storms back to her car and angrily clambers back in through the passenger door and into the driver's seat. At this point, the officer is walking up to me and the driver. Before she can even introduce herself, the mom in the car slams it into reverse and stomps on the gas, crashing into our porta potty and knocking it over, and then throws the car into drive and tries to mount the curb and drive on a sidewalk. The officer, driver, and I are staring in disbelief as she gets halfway over the curb and gets stuck. I can hear her screaming obscenities over the idling truck from inside her car. The officer promptly walks up to the door of the car and orders her out. My favorite part of the entire thing is watching her face go into shock as she realizes she just did all of that in front of a police officer. She gets slapped in cuffs as the parking officer calls for a second unit, and she is promptly set on the very curb she tried to drive over. She sits on the curb yelling to the now two officers about how we told her she could stay there and that we never asked her to move. The traffic officer responds that she was the one who was originally called when she first refused to move and that she already knows what's going on. While myself and the driver are giving a report to the second officer, my guys finish moving the remainder of the lumber and the driver finishes his statement and takes off to go back to the yard. By the end of the ordeal, she was arrested, charged with child endangerment, her kid was in the back of the car the whole time, reckless driving, destruction of property, the porta potty, and driving on a suspended license. On top of all of that, she also got her car towed. The kid went home with his grandma and she went to spend some quality time in a cell. I never expected her to actually heed my advice to just pull out around her. But I think next time she'll probably think twice about parking in a tow-away zone, if she ever gets a license again. Here is a story from a lifelong friend of mine who gave me permission to post this. Enter John, not the real name. John works at a high school as a science technician. He's a guy who sets up the science experiments for the students. These experiments often include things that can be bought at any ordinary shop, such as potatoes. You can never have enough potatoes, he told me while telling this story. This becomes important later. The management at this high school can be a complete arse, especially when it comes to time off. All absences over 30 minutes had to be approved a week in advance, which of course were always denied. To put this into perspective, one of his colleagues got refused half a day leave for a funeral of a friend that the colleague had known for over 15 years. One day, John had an important upcoming meeting that would only require him to take 30 minutes off from the end of his shift. He knew he could finish off the day's work with plenty of time remaining. So John made the request to take time off, but of course, the request was denied. Okay, you want to play that way? He thought. Despite the rule stating that all time off had to be approved, there was one small loophole. As the staff often needed to use all sorts of things for their work, be it paper for forms or potatoes to students' science experiments, the staff were allowed to leave to buy anything needed for their work, which the school would reimburse as long as they brought the receipt and took 30 minutes or less. Time for malicious compliance. The day of John's meeting came. He'd already finished everything that needed to be done for the day. So 30 minutes before his shift ended, he left work to go to the meeting. It had been less than 30 minutes by the time the meeting had ended, within what the school would allow without prior approval, but John was concerned that the school management might be unreasonable. However, since the school would allow any absences to buy materials for work, John swung by the supermarket that was just outside the school. When he returned to the school management asked him where he went. Promptly and proudly, John took out a single potato. With the biggest grin, he showed the receipt, dated with the time, and priced at 13 piasters. "I'll have my 13 piasters back, please." He still has a receipt to this day. Some years ago, I was working as a tiffy, doing commissioning on a rather large oil and gas platform in the North Sea. These platforms are filled with tanks, pipes, pumps, and other process equipment. For the operators to monitor what is going on inside the process equipment, there are sensors connected to the equipment with tubing. This is getting a bit technical, but hang on. At the tapping point, the tubing is connected to a high-pressure valve. These valves are basically two parts. The body, which is screwed or welded into the equipment, and upon it with the moving parts, handles, stem, seals, and plugs. This assembly is screwed onto the body with 4 bolts. The various processes contain fluids that are corrosive, and the platform is designed to last 50+ years. So the pipes and stuff is made from exotic and expensive alloys like 6MO Super Duplex Titanium, Hasalloy C360, and these valves are the same alloy as the equipment they are connected to. My job was to test and certify the sensors, but I noticed streaks of rust on the valve bodies. I found that a little bit odd. It was not my job to care about these things, but I mentioned it to one of our engineers and he told me that the week prior to these valves were due for shipment. The engineer at the supplier called the oil company to notify them that everything was ready. There was, however, a small discrepancy with a spec concerning the 4 bolts fixing the bonnet to the body. The spec called for bolts being of CS ordinary steel, but of course, the valves were delivered with bolts of the same exotic alloy as the valves themselves. He suggested they should update the spec, but the guy at the oil company said they must comply with the spec. The supplier put all hands on deck and even called in friends and family to replace the bolts. There were thousands of these valves, but they managed it before the deadline. The valves were installed then. After a few months in a harsh North Sea climate, the bolts started to rust. Then they had a team of pipe fitters to replace all these bolts. The platform had been put in operation by then, but it was considered safe to replace 1 bolt at a time, and the spec was probably fixed as well. I don't know if they actually bought back the bolts that were replaced in the first place. As I haven't spoken with a supplier engineer in person, I don't know how malicious this compliance was. He could perhaps demand to speak to a more competent senior engineer or raise an engineering query, but that would have taken some time to process, stalling the delivery. The way some of these contracts are written, there is a penalty for late delivery. Of course, we would like to see some consequences for the offending part, but there probably were none. A few hours production would cover the extra cost, which would be tax deductible in any case.
And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.